After an intense training session, a group of first responders head to a small diner to unwind. Surprisingly, Elon Musk walks into the diner, and what he does next is unexpected. It had already been an unusual morning for a bustling diner just outside of Austin, Texas. They'd found themselves playing host to a room full of first responders fresh off a training course. It had been intense and grueling, and many of them still donned all of their safety gear, too tired to remove it, and just in desperate need of endless cups of coffee and good food. Steve, a veteran firefighter, was seated near the window, his mind wandering. He'd recently learned his son had been accepted to college, a source of pride but also worry, as finances had grown tighter than ever. Bills had been piling up, and he wasn't sure how he'd manage tuition. Steve tried to shake off the stress, leaning back with his coffee and taking in the rare moment of calm with his team. The diner was the usual spot for first responders in the area, a small but cozy place where they could unwind. After such an intense training session, he knew his team needed this place more than ever. He'd make sure the diner staff were tipped well for being so accommodating too. Just then, the door opened and a figure walked in, causing a hush to fall over the room. Heads turned as Elon Musk, tech billionaire and visionary, strolled into the diner, looking both out of place but completely unfazed by the attention. Dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, Musk surveyed the room as if he were there for just a regular meal. The first responders were stunned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and people squinted to make sure they weren't seeing things. Musk didn't come with an entourage or any security. He was completely alone. No one thought that the diner was the kind of place that someone like him would frequent, but the billionaire had come here with a purpose. He'd heard that the first responders were taking a load off here, and he wanted to do something to pay them back for all of their hard work. Without acknowledging the attention, Musk calmly approached the counter. The young woman behind it gawked, clearly starstruck, but he simply ordered a black coffee and sat down in the far corner booth. As if by an unspoken agreement, no one moved or approached him, wanting to respect his privacy, but whispers rippled through the diner. Musk was known for unexpected, sometimes even strange gestures, but what was he doing here at a little roadside diner seemingly on his own? It didn't make sense. Billionaires didn't come to diners like this. Steve and his crew exchanged puzzled looks. They knew Musk had recently relocated some of his business to Texas, but to see him here in a regular diner was something else. As they continued to watch, Musk pulled out a small notebook, jotted down notes, and sipped his coffee with the same nonchalance he might have shown in a boardroom. He seemed completely immersed in whatever he was working on. It was one of the oddest sights anyone had ever seen. But they all wanted to know what he was writing. They began to whisper amongst one another, wondering if it could be the latest Tesla or SpaceX project that he was mapping out. After a while, Musk looked up and scanned the room, his gaze falling directly on the first responders. It was like he'd been pulled out of whatever work he was doing and was now fully aware of his surroundings. He took in the uniforms and the camaraderie, and a slight smile played on his face. He closed his notebook, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and made his way over to the first responders. He approached Steve's table, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent again as Musk placed his coffee cup down, nodding politely to Steve and the others. He studied them for a moment, as if calculating something only he could see. Then, with an air of quiet intensity, he sat down with them, taking Steve and the rest of the crew by complete surprise. "Hello," he simply said, without even bothering to introduce himself. "I heard you guys were doing some grueling training today." "That's correct," Steve replied, wondering what else he was supposed to add. He'd never spoken to a billionaire before, and he was afraid that anything he might say would sound silly to Musk's ears. But the SpaceX founder began to ask questions, subtle at first, but gradually more personal. He inquired about the kind of challenges they faced on duty, the issues they dealt with, and what it was like serving the community. He inquired about the training session they'd just done and how they all felt it went. He listened with an attentiveness that felt oddly personal, as if he was truly interested in what they had to say. As the conversation deepened, Steve found himself sharing more than he'd expected. He mentioned the struggles his family faced, his son's college dreams, and how difficult it had been to make ends meet. Others chimed in, voicing their own stories of sacrifice, loss, and the pressure they faced each day. There was a common theme. They loved their job, and it was one of the most important things to them, but it was hard to juggle with their own struggles too. Musk listened intently, not interrupting, just nodding and absorbing everything they said. Hours passed, coffee mugs were refilled over and over again, and more food had been served that morning than what was usually served in an entire day. Musk finally stood up. Without saying a word, he pulled out his phone and began typing something quickly. Steve and his colleagues exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to expect next. After a few minutes, Musk looked up, thanked them all sincerely for their service, and told them none of them needed to worry about the check. He'd got it covered. After a brief chat with the woman at the cash register, everyone tried not to stare as Elon Musk pulled out his bank cards and paid for everyone. None of them had expected a free meal, and certainly not from a billionaire, but they were grateful. However, it turned out just to be the tip of the iceberg when it came to unexpected things that Elon Musk would do in the wake of meeting the first responders. The billionaire headed toward the door. As he was about to leave, he turned back and, almost as an afterthought, announced, "Thank you for everything you do. I'll be seeing you all very soon." And with that, he walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. None of them could believe that they'd just spent hours chatting to a man like that as though he was just an average person on the street. His life was vastly different to theirs, but he'd seemed so genuinely interested in listening to them. Of course, the kind gesture of covering everyone's checks was very much appreciated too. The first responders sat there, bewildered and speculating wildly about what just happened. Was Musk's visit just a publicity stunt, or was it something more? And what did he mean when he said that he'd be seeing them all soon? They tried not to think too deeply about it, brushing it off as a passing comment, but something told them that the eccentric billionaire had a plan formulating. They didn't have to wait long to find out just what was going on. 2 weeks later, word spread around town that Musk's companies were involved in a new community initiative, though the details were kept under wraps. The first responders who had been in the diner when Musk walked in desperately tried to find out more information, but it was no use. The billionaire's team was keeping things tightly under wraps. Then, a few days later, Steve received a letter addressed to him from Tesla's corporate office. Inside was an invitation to a private event exclusively for first responders who had been in the diner. It hinted that the gathering would reveal an innovative new project. The usually calm and collected team went wild, speculating what Musk had in store. Crazy guesses flew around as some of them began to wonder what he'd been writing in his notebook. None of them would even come close to guessing the unexpected project Musk was forefronting, though. Curious but still skeptical, Steve, along with his team, attended the event. They were ushered into a massive open-air venue where an enormous, sheet-covered object stood center stage. Media, Tesla engineers, and local officials were gathered, all as clueless as the first responders about what was going to be unveiled. It seemed like Musk had created a huge mystery, and everyone wanted to know what he was up to. Chatter filled the venue, and it was clear there was a lot of anticipation in the room. When it almost became too much, Musk finally took to the stage. He spoke briefly about the sacrifices and challenges first responders faced. He used some of the examples that he'd heard whilst in the diner, explaining that after meeting them, he'd felt compelled to do something that went beyond a simple donation. Paying for their meal was all well and good, but he wanted to make a real difference. What they'd inspired was far more significant, an advancement he believed would reshape how first responders operated in crises. The cloth was pulled away to reveal a cutting-edge vehicle unlike anything they'd seen before. Musk explained that this new responder model was designed specifically for emergency services, equipped with solar-powered panels, water purification systems, a medical-grade air filtration system, and AI navigation that could anticipate and avoid traffic, directing the fastest routes to emergency scenes. The vehicle was rugged but sleek, built for the unpredictable terrains and conditions first responders often encountered. The audience gasped as Musk continued. This fleet will be deployed here in Texas first, and the best part, this initial round of vehicles will be fully funded by Tesla, SpaceX, and a group of private donors for exclusive use by the local police, fire departments, and emergency responders. Steve and his colleagues sat in stunned silence as the magnitude of Musk's gesture sank in. This was beyond anything they had imagined, a vehicle custom built for their needs, integrating the most advanced technology and gifted to them free of charge. It was the kind of support that could transform their ability to respond to emergencies and save lives. It just went to show that he truly had been listening to the challenges they faced in their job. However, they never expected that he would immediately get to work on something that would combat those difficulties. Musk wasn't done though. He went on to describe a new partnership program that would extend discounted college tuition to the children of all Texas first responders through a foundation Tesla was funding. As he wrapped up his speech, he emphasized that the world owed a debt of gratitude to those who risked their lives for others, and that he intended to make sure that gratitude translated into real, impactful support. The people who put the lives of others first shouldn't have to worry about how to provide a good future for their kids, and his scheme would elevate that stress. As applause erupted around them, Steve and his team were overwhelmed with gratitude, struggling to comprehend the impact this would have on their lives and the community they served. Many of them were moved to tears as they realized that their work lives and their personal lives were about to change dramatically. They couldn't believe that a quiet visit to a small diner had sparked a chain reaction leading to this unprecedented moment. For Steve, this went far beyond what he'd imagined in his most optimistic moments. Not only would the new responder vehicles change the way they worked, but Musk's initiative with college tuition meant that his son's dreams were no longer a financial impossibility. As the event ended, Musk made his way over to Steve and the others who had been in the diner, foregoing questions from the press or important city officials. To him, the first responders he'd met in the diner were the most important people in the room. He shook their hands, thanking them once again, then he ushered them into a side room away from the cameras. There was no fanfare, no photographers eagerly capturing every moment. It was just Musk and the first responders sharing a quiet acknowledgement of what they had built together in that brief, unexpected encounter at the diner. Many of the first responders who had tried to remain stoic in a room full of press now freely showed their emotions, finally realizing what all of Musk's plans and schemes would do for them. Many of them had been willing to dismiss him when he'd first walked into the diner and tucked himself away, but once he'd started talking to them, they'd seen a far more personable side that many others didn't get to see. They'd never imagined that he'd want to help in this way though, and they hoped he understood just what a positive impact he'd had. The first responders remained regulars at the diner, but Elon Musk never joined them again. The impact of what he'd done was felt every day though. His first responder vehicle and the technology it possessed were making a huge difference to their job. Beyond that, the college scheme felt like a weight had been lifted from many of them. They no longer had to worry about where the money would come from or if their children would get all they deserved. Even Steve, who had been skeptical right up until Musk's unexpected plans were revealed, still couldn't quite believe what had happened. He felt happier and lighter than he'd done in years. The job he'd always loved felt new and exciting, and back at home, he was wrapped up in his son's enthusiasm for attending college. He'd thanked Musk over and over again, even though the billionaire had insisted he didn't need thanking, but his life had truly changed, all thanks to him stepping in that diner. The local community would be forever grateful, knowing that in a small Texas diner, an ordinary coffee had led to something unexpected and life-changing. Musk was often seen as a divisive figure, a strange and shrewd businessman, but the first responders who had met him had seen a completely different side to him, and it was something none of them would ever forget. Now it's over to you. Do you know any other stories where people have gone above and beyond to make a positive difference? Do you believe millionaires and billionaires should do more for their communities? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.